Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Garden Robinson, and I'm your host for today's Field to Fork webinar. This is brought to you by North Dakota State University Extension. And special welcome if you're joining us from a watch party. We are celebrating a milestone in 2025. This is actually the 10th year we have done the Field to Fork series, and we're so glad you joined us today, and maybe you've been with us all along. We have reached thousands of people with information about growing, preparing, and preserving fruits and vegetables, along with best practices for food entrepreneurs. We have archived all of the more than 100 webinars from the previous years, and the link is always on the Field to Fork webinar page. The next slide shows the upcoming webinars. We hope you join us for these webinars as well. We have lots of great topics this year and fantastic speakers. The next slide shows the webinar controls. Because we have so many of you participating, we invite you to post your questions and comments in the chat. So let's practice finding and using the chat box. Please ignore the Q&A box. We're not going to use that today, just the chat box. Please type in your city and state where you are and the current outside temperature. While I was on my way to work this morning, it was -16 and it's now -3 in Fargo where I am. So you keep working on that. And the next slide, I have an acknowledgement. This program is sponsored in part with grant funding from the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. I will ask all of you to complete a very short online survey that will be emailed to you right after today's webinar. I need that for my grant report so we can keep doing these. As a special thank you, I will provide prizes to the lucky winners of the random drawings each week. And you can win more than one prize if you win more than 1 week. Be sure to put your complete address on the follow-up form, including your city, state, and zip code. Otherwise, it's hard to find you. As you go to our survey, be sure to scroll down to today's date. Again, welcome to today's webinar, and I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, who has given many webinars for this series. Don Kinzler is a native of Lisbon, North Dakota, and graduated from NDSU with a degree in horticulture. He and his wife operated a garden center in Fargo for 25 years. A lifelong gardener himself, Don is the extension agent for horticulture in Cass County. He writes 2 weekly newspaper gardening columns, has a weekly radio program, and I think he has a podcast too. He and his wife live in Fargo. So don't forget to post any questions in the chat. I will follow up after Don's presentation and ask those questions. And by the way, we will post a PDF of Don's PowerPoint talk and also a certificate. Take it away, Don.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and it is a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to talk about starting seeds. Starting seeds is one of my favorite things in all of gardening. And now, when my wife and I had our garden center for 25 years, we started many, many seedlings and transplants. But before that time and after that time, I've enjoyed growing seeds and seedlings in our basement. And that's what I currently do to produce all the bedding plants that I like to put in our flower beds and the vegetable plants for our vegetable garden. So I'm already busy doing some seeding in our basement. So it's just absolutely fascinating. And as I always like to say, if I can do this, anyone can. And the little seedlings that you just saw that I had started, these were last year, they turned into these beautiful nonstop begonias. Isn't that nice? And now starting seeds indoors is not difficult. There are just some basic guidelines that create success. The other thing that I really like is watching seedlings grow in the wintertime and early spring. It gives us that feeling of springtime. And so in addition to getting nice, wonderful plants, you also, this is great therapy also to watch things grow. So there's a lot more than just producing your own plants. And very much, we can all produce greenhouse quality plants by starting them ourselves. Now, these are plants that I had started last year in our basement, and then I had moved them outside to kind of toughen them up. So look what can be accomplished. And it's not all about getting plants on the cheap. If I can start a few of my own bedding plants and vegetable plants myself, then I can go to the local garden centers and I can spend those dollars that I save on trees, shrubs, and other things that I want. Now, there are some types of plants that are easier to start than others from seed. Tomatoes are relatively easy, zinnias, marigolds. So if you've never started plants from seed, I might suggest that you try some of these easier to grow things. So tomatoes, zinnias are wonderful. So let's get started. Let's talk about some of these kind of little tidbits that make seed starting so very, very successful. Okay, the first rule is don't start too early. Now, I hinted that I already have some things going. Now, what I have started going already under lights in our basement are begonias, which take a long, long time to grow. But the rule is don't start too early. For example, tomatoes don't get started until about April 1st. So each different type of plant, whether it's a flower or vegetable, each type of plant gets seeded basically at a different time. And now here's why. Each type of plant requires a different length of time from the time you seed it until the time that it makes a plant big enough for planting outside. Now, in most of the North Country here, we're looking at planting things outdoors somewhere between about the 15th of May and the end of May. So that's the target when we want these plants ready to go outside. So then we kind of count backwards. We see about how many weeks do something need to create that big plant, and then that's the seeding date. Okay, now don't worry about trying to write down all these dates because they're going to share this PowerPoint with you. But let's take a little look at these. Okay, now I mentioned that I've already started begonia seeds. So we look at February about 15th. I'm a couple of days ahead. Okay, another target date is March 1st. That's when things like petunias and coleus get started. Then the middle of March, we see on the list there cauliflower, cabbage, peppers. Um, April 1st is a key date. Marigolds, tomatoes. Probably one of the most popular for starting indoors. Tomatoes started April 1st. Kind of a rule of thumb, one way to kind of keep this in order too, is the tinier the seed, the longer it takes to produce a plant for May. The begonia seeds I started are like dust. They're just like powder. For example, we see on the list there, we wait to start squash or cucumber or melon plants until May 1st. They're a very big seed relatively, and they come up quickly. So that's kind of one way to generalize is the tinier seed, the earlier it needs to be seeded. So anyway, this is kind of a year in, year out schedule of when we would begin. And so that is very key. For example, if we thought, well, gosh, I kind of like big tomato plants to set out in May. Why don't I start those in February? Well, if you start plants earlier than their time, they tend to get too large, too leggy, overgrown, and then you just don't have a good quality plant by the time we set them out in May. Now, as far as materials, garden centers sell all kinds of things. You probably visited the shelves in the garden centers or the hardware stores where they sell all the different seed trays. You can buy the little cell packs, 4 packs or 6 packs, into which these plants go. There are larger trays, just similar to what the greenhouses use. So there's a lot of material out there. Lots of options for seed starting that are out there. But one of the handiest is the container that you save from a rotisserie chicken. It's got the little dome, just like a greenhouse, and it works perfectly. Now, the containers, the clear containers that come from a bakery and deli, they are just absolutely wonderful. They're like a little miniature greenhouse. One of my favorite containers for starting seeds is the little clear container that donut balls come in. It's just perfect for planting a little packet of seeds in that. Now, no matter what container you've chosen, it's very important to drill drainage holes into that because we don't want water to pond up in the bottom and rot our seeds. So very important to drill a number of holes in the bottom of your container if it doesn't already have holes in it. Now, Pinterest is full of kind of novel ideas. But for example, these little eggs, the seedlings are doing okay, but I'm kind of seeing in one of those water is ponding up. And of course, that's never a good sign. And a person would need to drill little holes carefully in these egg shells. So sometimes there are probably better ways than some of these kind of novelty type things. Gosh, and with the price of eggs nowadays, those shells are worth a lot of money. And many of us also have stockpiles of used pots and trays and cell packs and things that we've saved from our greenhouse adventures. One thing, if you're reusing something that was at a greenhouse before or that you've saved, clean it up really, really good. Soak it in a solution of about 9 parts water, 1 part chlorine bleach, and that will help to sterilize the damping off and other rotting type organisms. So make sure we clean them well. Now, here's the overall plan and concept of what we're going to do. Okay, we sow our seeds into a seed tray. Then we give the seed tray moisture, heat, light to coax germination. And then we take those seedlings out of the seed tray and individually transplant them into individual cell packs, like the ones we buy at a greenhouse, the little 4 packs or 6 packs, or maybe a little tiny pot all its own. So we go out of the seed tray and into the individual cell packs like that, the transplanting. Now, a person might ask, why do you start them in a seed tray and then go through the manual labor of transplanting them into a cell pack? Why not just plant that little seed directly into the cell pack and save yourself a step? Well, there's good reason. That is not the way that greenhouse production is done. Boy, and if this would work, every greenhouse would be on it. There's good reasons for not direct seeding into that final pack. And here's why. Okay, direct seeding tends to result in weaker plants, sometimes a little spindlier. Germination is never 100%, which means in each of those little cells, you probably want to plant 2 seeds, and seeds are kind of expensive. If both come up, they're going to compete. You don't want 2 plants in each of those little cells, so you'd end up taking one out. And also, the process of transplanting the little seedling out of the seed tray and into a cell pack imparts transplant vigor. You can sink it down just slightly deeper. It makes a sturdier plant. And so traditionally in the greenhouses, you start seeds in a seed tray and then transplant them out into the final packs. So a much better process than trying to direct seed into your final pack. For example, tomato plants, these were direct seeded, but they always come up a little spindlier. Later on, we're gonna show how to transplant tomato seedlings, and you can sink them down a little more. It just creates a sturdier plant. Now, I'm giving a little view into how the big commercial greenhouses do this. Okay, they do not direct seed into the final 4-pack. Instead, they have big greenhouses that are warm and they've got mist systems over, and they create these little transplants. Okay, so these are kind of like the seed trays that we'll produce, except fancier. And over the last 20 years or so, they've developed what are called plug trays. Now, if you look carefully, these are little vinca seedlings, flowering vinca, and what they do is they use seed that is specially selected to be almost 100% germination, and with vacuum seeders, a seed is put in each of these tiny little compartments, and then the big greenhouse is humid and warm, and you get these little seedlings like this. And so then they transplant these out into the final 4-packs. But because each of these little seedlings are in a little plug, they kind of pop out. You don't need to tease the seedlings apart. The roots don't interconnect. And so when Mary and I had our greenhouse, towards the end of it, plugs were just being kind of invented. And so we were starting to raise the little seedlings in plugs, and then we would transplant them into the final. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little peek as to how some of the commercial greenhouses are doing that. So if you encounter that term, plugs, but still, they're being transplanted into the final pack or pod, not direct seeded into that. Now, there are some things that are best direct seeded because they don't like their roots monkeyed with. Cucumbers, squash, pumpkins, melons resent having their seedlings kind of torn apart and transplanted. So direct seeding is kind of the norm. Now you could use peat pots such as that, and the roots will just grow through that. And so it minimizes the transplanting shock that melons and cucumbers and squash do not like. Now, have you ever seen when you're looking at the garden center or the national chain, these little pellets of peat? They're kind of neat. You put them in water, follow the directions, and they expand into this neat little kind of self-containing peat pot thing. And then you plant the seed into that. The roots just go through. One thing that I do need to caution you with, if you use these or the peat pots that I showed in the previous, the roots sometimes have difficulty totally penetrating out. So when I use these, and I do use peat pots for our melons, I always, as I'm transplanting them into the garden, I tear down kind of the top of the peat pot. That cannot be sticking up above soil. And I also, with a knife or my fingers, just kind of break apart that outer edge so that the roots can better escape. All right, so let's get on to kind of the generic seed starting. Okay, we need seed starting mix. So instead of an all-purpose potting type mix, we need seed starting mix. There are many different brands, and these are milled finer. They don't have the big chunks, so that seeds can pop up easier with these seed mix. Now, most of these, when you first open the bag, tend to be quite dry. And if we used them straight out of the bag, when you went to water the seed tray, the mix would tend to just float around. And, I'm a good person to talk about much of this because I've made every mistake there is. All right. And so I've done that. I've used it just out of the bag, seeded. When I went to water it, everything just floated around and made a mess. So I've learned to moisten that mix the day before works really, really well. So I like to open the bag, add some water to it, get your hands in, mix it around really good. You don't want it soaking, sopping wet, but just some good moisture throughout the bag. And then close the bag up. And the next day it'll be mellow and moist, and it will re-wet very nicely. Now, here's a product that has come along over the past couple of years that's very fascinating, and it's called coconut coir. I've heard different pronunciations for the COIR, coconut coir. Now, this is a byproduct of coconut shells. This is looked at as a replacement for peat. Some days are peat bog, some day are peat peat bogs might run out. So this is a replacement. So you can see these seed starting bricks. And it's kind of neat. The directions say to add a certain amount of water to each of these bricks. You add 1 gallon. And so I added a gallon of water, let it set, and pretty soon one of these blocks made this whole great big mound. They really expand. So coconut coir is being used in many of the seed starting mixes. So regardless of kind of which of the mixes you've chosen, always fill the tray to the top, because it'll settle when it's watered. We want that tray filled with your seeding mix, and I like to bounce it on the tabletop a time or so. And if it settles a little bit, add a little more on the top. We want that tray to have its maximum amount of seeding mix. We want the little seedling roots to have as much soil as possible. So don't fill it only half full, but you fill it all the way up. Give those little roots plenty of room down to grow in. So with each of the seed trays, it's better to put only one type of seed, unlike what they are doing here. For example, okay, in this seed tray, I see they're doing tomatoes, zinnia, marigold. The reason for not doing that is each of the different vegetable flower types germinate and grow at different rates. And as soon as our seeds are up, we want to take off any covering. And if there are multiple types in the same seed tray, it it interferes with that ability to uncover them if they're all coming up at different rates, if you follow me. So it's better to use a smaller tray and only put one type of seed in it. Then when they start sprouting, you can take off the clear plastic cover. And that's why I like those containers that donut balls come in. They're just right for a packet of seed to plant into. So when we actually get to planting the seeds, if it's a larger container that you're putting lots of tomatoes in, you can do them in rows. Or if it's a smaller container, you can just broadcast them over the top. That's how I do most of ours. I broadcast the seed over the top. Now, I do like to empty that seed pack into the palm of my hand and use the other hand to grab and gently sprinkle the seed. I've found that when I try to shake them out of the seed pack, if I'm not careful, they'll all end up in one big dump, a clump on the seed mix. So I do like to shake them out and kind of work them just with the other hand. I found that works really well. So once you've got the seeds over the top of the mix, then if it's a large seed, as shown here on the left-hand side, if it's a large seed, very visible, cover it with some of the moistened mix. They pre-mixed, pre-moistened the day before. So cover those. On the right-hand side, if they're very tiny seeds, almost the size of a poppy seed, uh, don't cover them. Just sprinkle them over the surface of the seeding mix, and when you water them, they're going to settle on down. So again, large seeds, if you can see the seeds, my rule of thumb is if you can see the seeds laying there, cover them with a little light cover. Doesn't need to be very deep, but just cover them with enough so that you can't see the seed. But if it's a tiny seed, just sprinkle them over the surface. And if you can't kind of see them after the fact, you're good to go. The next step is to water gently. There are different ways. You could use a little mist bottle. You can very carefully use a watering can, but you have to kind of move quickly so you don't puddle it all up and float the seeds out. Or you could even set the seed tray in a tray, a water holding type tray. Fill that with water, set the seed tray in, and it will wick up from the bottom through the holes. And when you see the top nice and dark, then you can take it out of that water. So notice that after seeding, we are watering. That settles everything on in. So even though we pre-moistened the seeding mix the day before, very important to water it. Then the next step is to cover. That is going to maintain the moisture that the seeds need in order to germinate, and it'll give nice humidity and keep a little warmth in there. Plastic wrap works well. Or if a container came with a lid, such as this rotisserie chicken, we just can use that. Or my donut hole containers. Okay, the next step is to provide heat. This makes a huge difference. Now, as you see pictured there, these seedling heat mats, they're not too expensive. You can order them online. Garden centers sell them. And these provide bottom heat, which really makes a world of difference. The temperature needed for most things for germination is around a soil temperature of around 70 to 75 degrees. And this makes all the difference. I have about 4 of these. I wouldn't germinate seeds without them. Makes a huge difference. You know, before these, I used to sit them maybe on the top of the refrigerator or near a heat duct or somewhere. But these are so much handier. There are even some of the more expensive types that have an actual thermostat. The ones without a thermostat just tend to run at the recommended temperature. The ones I use do not have the thermostat, but that does give a little more control. As soon as the seedlings pop up out of the mix, then that is the point at which to take off the plastic cover. And as soon as you see green seedlings appear, they need light. I do an operation similar to this here. I have the seedlings on a heat mat, and I have lights on top of them immediately, because then as soon as they start sprouting, they'll have the light and they won't stretch for light. You see, if this were in the dark and the seedlings started to sprout, they might stretch and get spindly for light. Now, if you look carefully at these seed trays, there's green appearing. So that is the point at which to get that cover off to start allowing some air circulation in. So if seedlings are getting enough light, they're going to be short and stocky. And when we're using lights, which we'll talk about in a minute, we have to be sure that the light is situated quite close. These are healthy little cabbage seedlings coming up. I think I'd even lower that light. I think I'd lower the light a little closer. One of the common problems with starting, maybe a common complaint, is that seedlings grow spindly indoors, and that's from inadequate light. Even though these seedlings are in a sunny window, they're still stretching for light. You know, unless a window is really, really big, even a south window, it takes a while for that sun to get around to that window and actually focus in on those seedlings. So I love using lights, artificial lights, instead of depending on a window, but window can work too. Now, here are some well-grown tomato seedlings, transplants under lights. Notice that the lights are almost touching the leaves. That's perfect. Now, here we have healthy tomato plants versus tomato plants that are in a window that are stretched. Notice the difference. The tomatoes on the right are stretching for light, not enough light. Okay, let's talk a little bit about these plant lights. Now, here is a homemade rig made out of wood, 2x4s, and etc. And see if we got multiple shelves. There's also window light. But notice that the light fixtures are hung by chains. That's very important, so that as the plants grow, you can raise the light. That allows the light to be right down there where it's needed to be. And as the plants grow, you can raise the lights up on the chain. Now, if you don't want to build something out of wood, you can buy these metal type storage shelves and then just hang the lights from chains on those. That's quite handy rig. So if you've got a shelf and you can't hang the lights from chains, well, you can prop the plants up. Notice here they're using different trays and combinations to kind of boost the plants up so that they're where they need to be, close to the lights. Okay, let's talk about the types of light sources. Now, I believe Esther McGinnis, a few weeks down the road, I believe is talking about the science of plant lights. So I'm not going to get heavily into this, other than there's lots of different types of lights. There's white fluorescence, there's white LEDs. There's the purplish. You've probably seen the purplish plant type lights. They're fascinating. They provide some of the complete wavelengths that plants need. Now, regardless of the type of light that you choose, I like the long tube type lights because you can put your trays of seedlings under those. If you choose a round type plant light, it's harder to get seedlings under that. So I like the long type lights. Now, here is a rig that we actually built a few years ago in a back dark storage area of our Cass County Extension office. And there I have plants on the left-hand side, they're growing under white LED lights. On the right-hand side, they are growing under the purplish plant type bulbs. And both are doing very well. I've had a good success with both. Now, how long do you keep lights on? The easiest way to remember is this. How many hours of sleep is recommended for a human? Usually it's 8 hours, right? Okay, so let's give plants that same 8 hours of sleep. So 16 hours of light, 8 hours of sleeping darkness. A timer works beautifully for that. 16 hours on, 8 hours off. Now, let's take a look at these fascinating purplish type plant lights. So their plants grow beautifully under them. The leaves here are actually green. Plants take kind of a different coloration under these. So to actually see what the plants are doing, sometimes you need to move them into natural light. For example, take a look at the marigolds up there, kind of towards the right. They look red, don't they? Look like red marigolds. Well, actually, they are these yellow and kind of brownish type marigold. See, these were at one end under the white LEDs, and the other kind of reddish looking ones, even though they're same color, were under the purple plant lights. Okay, it's time to transplant. We've got our seedlings popped up nice. These marigold seedlings are doing well. It's time to transplant them out of the seed tray and give them each room to grow into the individual packs. Now, for this, we need a high quality potting mix. They're also very dry, fresh out of the bag, so we need to moisten it down. I like to moisten it down the day before and then get our hands in, mixed up really nice so it's nice mellow. All right, the cell pack I've chosen is actually a double 6-pack, but 4 packs work well, 6 packs. Um, and next we need to fill them up and fill it all the way up to the top. Because again, when we water, it's going to settle. We want the roots of those, each little seedling, we want the roots to have the maximum amount of soil. So don't fill it up only partially. Fill it all the way up. It'll settle down when we water it. Sometimes I'll just tap it on the tabletop a little bit. Don't press it down with your fingers in there. We don't want to squish out all the air spaces. Just tap it on the table a little bit. If it settles down, top it off with some more mix, and it will settle down a little bit when we water. Okay, the tool that we use is called a dibble. Standard in the greenhouse. You can make your own with a sharpened dowel. Excuse me, in a pinch, a pencil will work just fine too. So what we do is with our dibble in the seed tray, just gently lift out a little clump of the seedlings, and then we tease each one kind of apart, gently tease them apart. Excuse me. Tease each seedling apart. We only want one seedling in each of the cell packs. So with our dibble, we make a hole in each of those little cells and then insert a seedling and gently press down with the dibble to firm the roots in. And now you see I've got 12 little seedlings all put down into their individual cell packs. Mary and I used to do this by the thousands and thousands. We also had a crew that helped us. Then after you've got the entire tray, in the greenhouses, they're called flats. After you've got the entire thing transplanted, then it's time to gently water it in. Now let's take a look at tomatoes. Tomato seedlings that are ready for transplanting. See, they're just starting to get their kind of true leaves up in the center. The first longer leaves are called the seed leaves, but they're just ready for transplanting. It's better not to let the seedlings get too large in the seed tray. Otherwise, their roots are more interconnected and harder to tease apart. And also, these little seedlings need room to grow, so they need space, which is what we are going to do with the transplanting. So with the dibble, I'm gently lifting out a little seedling, kind of teasing it apart from its little buddies, making a hole in one of the cells of the cell pack. Look at the roots on that tomato. Isn't that neat? And then I'm firming the soil around. I would have liked to have gotten that seedling down a little deeper yet. It could go a little deeper. Now here are petunia seedlings all ready to transplant. Aren't those neat? Those are some that I seeded last year. So again, we lift seedlings out of the seed tray, just get one little seedling. We only want one seedling per cell in these to give them room to grow. And so I'm transplanting the little petunias into the packs. And so, okay, after we've transplanted those, we let the plants grow under our lights in the basement or a very sunny window if you've got a really big sunny window. So we let the plants grow, so under the lights. And then around the end of April, first part of May, you know, that's still frost season. We aren't really safe to plant things out until middle of May, the last half of May, middle of May, end of May. But we can start getting our things accustomed to the outdoors. So the plants that we've grown, the end of April, first part of May, can start toughening in, called hardening off. Now, a few years ago, I created these what are called cold frames. They're 4 feet by 8 feet. So lumber is easy to use in those dimensions. And at one of the national chain stores, they do sell these clear polycarbonate 8-foot sheets. So I cut it down to 4. And I made these little cold frames. They're like a little unheated greenhouse. And this is how I finish the plants off. I wouldn't need to. On the nice days, I could just take the plants out, get them accustomed to some sunlight. They'll get toughened in and all ready for us. But that's one option, to create cold frames like that. Um, and of course, it can get chilly at night, but I've got straw around these. I can heap the straw back up around these. And so really a nice process. And then our things are ready for May planting. And again, these are petunias. There's some marigolds there that I've produced last year. And as I say, if I can do this procedure, really anyone can. The process that I described here is really quite a tried and true method. It's the method that we used in the greenhouse for many, many years, and it can be easily modified so that we can do this in our own basement. Um, we're lucky we just have an unfinished basement, so a corner of it, it doesn't matter if I get some potting soil and seeding mix and a little water in it. So it works very, very well. And so, like I always like to say, let's hear it for our homegrown plants. Um, at our home in South Fargo, we raise all of our own bedding plants for our flower beds. We raise all of those ourselves in our basement. And the plants that we put out in our vegetable garden, we also raise those ourselves. So a couple of the key points, excuse me, is starting at the appropriate date for whatever type of plant you plan on raising. Start at that appropriate date. Don't direct seed into the final cell pack. Instead, start them in a seed tray that you can give good conditions, good heat, watch the moisture, and then when they come up and you've got a beautiful tray of seedlings, then transplant them into the final 4-pack or the final little pot. That gives each of them room to grow, and there you're good. And then towards the end of April, first part of May, as you can, move the plants outside. One thing I might mention, when you harden plants off, you can even do this with some of the plants you buy at a greenhouse. When you harden the plants off, they don't want to be exposed to the full brunt of the sunshine and the wind right away. They need to gradually become accustomed to that. So maybe for the first couple of days, excuse me, just put them out in the sunshine, maybe for an hour or so, gradually give them a little more light, a little more wind, maybe even start them in the shade a little bit. But the idea is to gradually get them accustomed to the wind and the sun, and then you're going to have a great plant for planting out. My contact information is here. If you ever have any additional questions, and we've got a good time for questions now, but if you have any questions that you'd like to email me, my email is donald.kinzler@NDSU. There, I'll leave it on the screen for just a few minutes, and feel free to reach out to me. Again, I really appreciate this. It gives me the chance to talk about one of my favorite topics of gardening. And now, Julie, if you would like to read the questions, that would be great.
You have a bunch. So thank you, Don, for this beautiful presentation. I always love to look at your pictures too. So going back to the first one we received, what do you think about egg cartons for starting plants?
The little cells of an egg carton are kind of tapered down. It will work. I would rather Um, again, I'd rather not seed into those for the same reason we don't direct seed into cell packs. I would rather start in a seed tray and then transplant. But seedlings can be grown. I've seen people that have grown plants in egg cartons, and that has worked. I maybe wouldn't search that out as a way to do that, but if you have the egg cartons and want to try it, it can work.
Okay, do you recommend using any fertilizer when watering?
Wonderful question. Now, the seed mix that we start with has a little bit of fertilizer, just the right amount of nutrition to get seedlings going. So the seed tray itself, while those little seedlings are popping up and growing in that seed tray does not normally need fertilizing. But after you transplant those seedlings out into their individual little cell packs or tiny little pots, at that point, then they can use a little extra nutrition. Now, check the bag on the potting mix that you're using. If it has a slow release fertilizer, that's usually enough. We don't want to burn the little roots. But a person can start with a weak type solution. When I say a weak type solution, when you look at the box of water soluble fertilizer, usually there's a rate for indoor plants and a rate for outdoor plants. Use the indoor weaker solution. So after they get into their final cell pack, then a person could start a weak fertilizer solution.
So this next one is a kudo, not a question. This was great. Thank you. I have listened to several things on seed starting, but I loved this practical, detailed tips on things to do for success, especially transplanting from the seed trays to the seed packs as they come up. Very helpful. So not a question, just pat yourself on the back from me. Very good.
Thank you.
The next one is kind of a tricky question, kind of difficult. I was looking online myself to see what I could find. With all the emphasis on microplastics in food containers now, is there any research that details microplastics in the use of plastic containers with plants?
Yes, I have not encountered any. Um, yes, and I'm seeing, as you are, Julie, I'm seeing more and more about that, but I have not seen anything specifically towards how the microplastics might be affecting plants. I've not seen anything, but I have a feeling we're going to be seeing much more about that to come.
Well, we'll keep our eyes out. Can these plants be transplanted too deep?
Generally, uh, well, yes, it would be possible to get them too deep. But, when a person is looking at these little seedlings, if you're transplanting them at the appropriate time before they stretch too much or get too big. We're only talking about a difference between a quarter inch, half an inch of depth. And like the little petunias that you saw customarily in the greenhouse, you do sink them down in. It's just the leaves basically that are popping out. Tomatoes can actually root along that little buried stem, so they like a nice deep planting. Um, so if you're transplanting them while the seedlings are young and at the appropriate stage of transplanting, there's not really a concern as long as you're not bearing that central growing point. But if the plants got really big, for example, peppers don't like to be planted too deeply. And so get the seedlings, transplant them when they're young, and that won't be an issue.
All right. What are your thoughts on using rock wool? Can it transplant directly into the pot?
Rockwool, I have a huge bucket list. And one thing on my bucket list is to try rockwool. But all reports are that, yes, you can, that can transplant, as you mentioned, directly into the pot. But that's on my bucket list. I've got to try rockwool.
Why does the peat pot top need to be torn down?
Yeah. Why did I say with that peat pot, why do you tear down that top? And here's the reason for that. If that peat pot is near the surface of the soil, the top of the peat pot, near the surface of the soil, moisture will wick up out of the peat pot and it will starve the root system for moisture. So the reason for tearing down that upper ridge is to make sure that the peat pot is sunk well below soil surface so it won't have that wick effect losing moisture.
You might have covered this, I don't recall. What is the difference between seed starting mix, potting mix, and potting soil?
Okay. Um, Potting soil, when they say potting soil, that's kind of a what would you call it? The term soil isn't really accurate because most of the mixes do not have any soil. They're all made up of peat moss, composted bark, and things. There's really not soil in those potting soils. So the better term is potting mix because they're a mixture of ingredients. And so the difference between potting soil and potting mixes are kind of the same thing. They shouldn't really be calling it soil. But anyway, okay. So you have those on the one side. On the other side, you have the seeding mixes. And the main difference between seeding mix and potting mix is the potting mix has bigger chunks for better drainage on a big pot, whereas the seeding mix is a it's milled finer without all the big chunks so that the seeds can push through easier.
So, do you cover onion seeds?
To cover onion seeds, and onion seeds can actually be started now in February. And to cover onion seeds, I do cover when I seed them. I cover them with a very light covering, just enough. I don't plant them very deeply, but just enough of the mix so that the seed doesn't dry out too much. But I don't want those little tiny onion seedlings, because they come up really fine. I don't want them to have to push through too much. So I just cover them very lightly with a little bit of the mix. Then light would still kind of shine through that mix because I think light probably helps increase germination on onion seed. And so just very lightly cover. And then with soil. And then I do put a plastic covering over that.
So, another onion question. Last year, our onion seedlings got a little tall, 6 inches or so, and I didn't know if we should trim the tops or not. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, trimming the tops of little onion seedlings. By the way, onion plants, seeds that you start of onions to develop an onion plant that you transplant out in the garden, those give you much bigger onion bulbs than the dry onion sets. Uh, so anyway, when you're growing the onion plants from seed, when they pop on up, and sometimes they'll get a little spindly. it is customary to cut those back just with a scissors or shear, cut them back. That helps more leaves to come out of the little developing bulblet. And so, yes, while they're still in the house, in the seed trays, cut them back, oh, I don't know, maybe up to 2 inches or so above soil, maybe a little lower even. So yes, cutting them back does help them to develop. Kind of a little bit odd, isn't it, that you'd be shaving back something like that, but it works beautifully on onion plants.
Now we're going to talk about the cover on the, your donut box or whatever it happens to be. Do you remove the cover after the first one has germinated, or do you wait until all are germinated, or somewhere between first and all?
Yeah, let's go with somewhere between first and all. It seems like there'll always be one little upstart, seedling that pops up maybe quicker than the others, and there are always some that maybe drag along. If you're lucky, they'll all pop up at the same time. But what I like to do is wait until it looks like the majority of what you've seeded is probably showing, and then remove the cover. Or, if it still looks like some are germinating, but others you're afraid are going to get kind of too moist, then maybe just set the covering ajar a little bit so it's getting air, but you're still preserving some of that nice humidity underneath.
So Don, what's your technique to open the covers from the trays so the seedlings don't fly out or get shocked? So let's say you used a rotisserie chicken
Oh, sure. I
thing
follow
and
you.
yeah.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Excuse me for not comprehending right away. Okay. For example, yeah, the rotisserie chicken, I think those do kind of snap down on. Yeah. And if you're trying to unsnap it, yeah, the whole thing could kind of, come apart. I like to just set it on there without snapping it. And like the little donut containers, I don't snap them shut. I just set it down. In fact, with the donut containers, they're usually hinged, kind of a clamshell, they're hinged. I cut that. I cut that joint so that the lid is just setting on top. And then when I want to actually remove it, I can just totally remove it. So yes, the rotisserie chicken doesn't need to be snapped tightly down, just set on. Yeah, I see exactly what you mean. Thanks.
Oh, let's see. Another kudo. I've never grown from seed before, and this class has given me the confidence for the season. What a wonderfully presented topic.
Well, thank you.
Do you leave your heating pads on 24 hours a day or turn them off with the lights?
That is one thing that we maybe didn't cover in this presentation. I don't think I said how long to leave that seed tray on the seed mat, the heat mat. Now, the heat mat should be left on 24 hours a day. Once you put the seed tray on that heat mat to encourage germination, it needs that continuous heat. Most things require that uniform heat. But as soon as the have germinated and sprouted, about the time you take that lid off, also take it off of the heat mat. At that point, those developing little seedlings don't want it that warm. If you take it off and just put it under your lights at kind of your normal temperature, you can actually cook the seeds if you left those seedlings on that warm of temperature. So thank you for asking that.
A couple of questions about either damping off or dampening off. I'm not sure what the correct term is.
Usually I see it maybe damping off,
All right.
damping.
How do you deal with that? What can you do to counteract that?
All right. One thing a person can do that I didn't mention, one thing you can do to counteract that is as soon as the majority of the seeds have sprouted, remove that clear plastic cover so that they have good airflow. You can also add a fan, a very small fan. Doesn't have to run 24 hours a day. Maybe put it on a timer every so often. Get a little airflow across the top. And that's another good reason for filling that seed tray up to the top so that you have good airflow across the surface. If the seeding mix was sunk down in, there's less air movement across the top of that. Fungicides are not usually needed to prevent damping off disease. The main thing is to get plenty of airflow. And once that these seedlings are up and have germinated, then start allowing that surface to dry off and then water it when the surface has become dry. So usually it's kind of a cultural type thing that prevents the damping off.
And just a couple more questions left here. And I think you just answered it, but how often should you water when they're covered with their covers? And how often after you take the lids off should you do the watering?
Okay, the nice thing about putting the lid or plastic covering on top is that there will be enough moisture there until those seeds sprout. So you should not have to water that seed tray after the initial watering, after seeding. It should be fine. No watering needed until those seeds are up. Then take it off of the heat mat, take the covering off, and then allow it to start drying out. And that's where kind of experience, a little bit of feel kind of comes into play, and allow the surface to start drying off. Don't let the little seedlings start to wilt over, but allow the top to start to dry off. And that's kind of where that, you can't really say every couple of days or, there's no timeline. It'll kind of depend on things. But when the top of that seed mix gets lighter in color and less moist looking, that's a good thing. But check it daily for sure, and then give it a watering. You can either water from the top or water from the bottom when it looks like that top is starting to dry out.
And the last question I am seeing is about winter sowing outside in milk jugs. Is that a possibility in Fargo, North Dakota?
There are people
Oh,
doing winter sowing, and you've hit number two on my bucket list of gardening things to try. I haven't tried winter sowing yet, but the internet is filled with ways to do that in clear jugs. And people are actually doing it here in the North Country successfully. The winter sowing, the seeds, of course, just stay kind of dormant until conditions until conditions warm up enough. I've seen people that are growing microgreens and different things in that. And so it can be used. I don't think I would use it to try to raise flowering bedding plants, but for some early vegetables or greens or things to use, it's been done and that's on my bucket list. I'm going to try that. I'm probably maybe too late for winter sowing this year, but I'm going to try that as well. But it is successful. I know there are people doing it here.
I think we have quite a bit of winter left, so maybe you could try it
Am I
out.
being optimistic?
I think you're optimistic.
Maybe I still have time to try winter sowing.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for being here, our first webinar of this season. And we've planned a mixture of food science as well as some little bit of regulations and a lot of things about food. So we hope you continue to join us. I certainly thank Don for his beautiful talk today and very inspirational. I'm seeing a lot of you saying, hey, I want to try this, and I do too. So it looks great. Please fill out the survey that should be coming to your inbox shortly. And again, thanks to Don and thanks to all of you for being here today.
Thank you, Julie, and everyone. Have a great spring.